Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin Drought and Water webinar for the month of May. My name is Rachel McGuire. I'm with the Auburn University Water Resources Center located in Auburn, Alabama. If you're new to this webinar, we'll have time at the end for any comments, questions, and discussion. You can use the question box on the GoToWebinar tool panel to type in your questions during the webinar, or you can raise your hand by pushing that hand icon that's also on the GoToWebinar tool panel. Our speakers today will be David Zierden, the Florida State Climatologist with the Florida Climate Center at Florida State University. He'll speak with us about our current drought status, seasonal forecasts, and outlooks for the ACF and greater region. We also have Tom Littlepage, Branch Chief of the Alabama Office of Water Resources, part of the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs. He'll speak with us on the state of Alabama input. We have Paul Inkhorn, a hydrologist with the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center, speaking with us on our stream flows and groundwater conditions. We have Jody Wan of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District with our ACF reservoir conditions. Samantha Lucas has sent in data from the Apalachicola Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve on daily average salinity data that I'll be presenting on her behalf. And lastly, we have Todd Hamill of the NOAA National Weather Service's Southeast River Forecast Center, where he is a service coordination hydrologist on our streamflow forecast for the ACF. Speakers, as a reminder, remember to unmute yourselves when it's your turn and give me a nudge to put the next slide up for you. With that, I'll start with our first speaker, David Zierden, when he's ready. David, do we have you on the line? David?
Okay, yeah, I'm here now. For some reason, I was unable to unmute myself.
Okay. Well, we hear you fine just now.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. And again, good afternoon, everyone. And we will begin with the weather and climate events that have been kind of happening recently or in the news. And what's really been going on is a very stubborn or set-in blocking pattern over North America over the last two weeks or more. And over on the top left is a 500 millibar chart. It's actually a forecast for last Friday. But what it shows is a very common blocking pattern called an omega block, which is characterized by a pretty strong upper level low pressure system over the desert Southwest and another upper level low over the Western Atlantic off the east coast of the United States. But in between is amplified high pressure. And like I say, this is known as an omega block, and it's very commonly associated with a slow moving and persistent weather pattern. Closer to the ground on the surface, this setup has led to ample or even heavy rainfall over Louisiana and Texas, where the Gulf moisture is being ushered in by that upper level low. Here we see 7-day accumulations on the bottom left, radar derived accumulations, and everywhere in purple is over 10 to 15 inches of rain over just the last week. Some areas nearing 20 inches along the Louisiana coast. We see flooding this past week over the Baton Rouge area, New Orleans, and especially Lake Charles, where they got hit by multiple hurricanes last year. So really a not needed flooding event for southern Louisiana over the past week, and that extended into eastern Texas. On the next slide, we'll look a little closer to home, and this blocking pattern, while it brought this heavy rainfall for Louisiana and Texas, it left Georgia, Alabama, and Florida very dry, under high pressure, lower humidities, a strong and persistent easterly wind at the surface. Over here on the left, I have a map showing consecutive days without rainfall that still extends currently. And we see over most of the ACF basin 12 to 13 days in a row without measurable rainfall. Over the peninsula of Florida, it's even worse, where we've gone up to 2 weeks, 3 weeks or more without measurable rainfall over much of central and south Florida. And this is at a time of year where temperatures are approaching their summertime values with highs in the 90s, so, and relatively low humidity. So evapotranspiration has really ramped up over the past couple weeks. One big impact for that is a lot of wildfire activity. Last week there were 46 active wildfires across the state at one point. Kind of the big event was the tree frog fired in Indian River County. Over 1,100 acres burned, and it even shut down Interstate 95 for an afternoon. So with this dry spell we've had, lower humidities, wildfire danger certainly ramping up. On the top right, we see the observed fire danger index from Florida Forest Service, with most of the peninsula in the very high range, and even one county in the extreme range as of yesterday, and that continues today. So on the next slide, we'll start taking a broader look at the drought situation across the Southeast. And this is the current US Drought Monitor, which fortunately shows all of the ACF Basin as being drought-free right now, and that includes all of Alabama, all of Georgia, and all of North Florida. We do see some abnormally dry conditions and even moderate drought along the coastal Carolinas and extending into Virginia. And we also see abnormally dry conditions and a small spot of expanding moderate drought over southwest Florida. So all this dry weather we've seen over the past 2 weeks hasn't really caught up with the drought monitor yet, but is certainly something to monitor as we go forward. On the next slide, we'll take a look at University of Alabama Huntsville's Lawn and Garden Moisture Index. And you see it's very dry across all of the Southeast. And you see that really in the driest category across much of peninsular Florida and the coastal Carolinas, where we're seeing abnormally dry or D0 conditions and even moderate drought starting to expand. So this lawn and garden index is really characterizing well this short-term dryness that we've seen over the past 2 or 3 weeks. On the next slide, we'll start taking a look at recent rainfall over the last 30 days. Again, these are radar-derived estimates, but it shows the very heavy rainfall over southern Louisiana and eastern Texas. The dark purple and even white areas are 30-day totals of 15 to 20 inches or more just in the last 30 days. So very heavy and flooding rainfall in those areas. However, as we move further east over Alabama and Georgia and the ACF Basin, we're more or less close to normal over the last 30 days, with accumulations of 2 to 4 inches, heavier amounts in the upper ACF Basin, but pretty close to normal over the past 30 days. On the next slide, we'll look further back, and now we're looking at the past 90 days, and rather than accumulations, this is departure from normal. And we see most of Alabama has been above normal in rainfall over the last 90 days. You see the very heavy amounts over southern Louisiana and Texas, again, 20 inches or more in much of the area. But we see that the ACF Basin is kind of the transition zone between the wetter 90-day period and the drier 90-day period, where much of Georgia is near normal or even below normal. And we certainly see the dryness in the Carolinas and over the state of Florida. So we'll go ahead to the next slide and start looking ahead to our forecast. And this stubborn high pressure is forecast to hang on over the southeast and the ACF Basin. Very little to no rainfall forecast over the next 7 days. We do see over the peninsula of Florida maybe some afternoon convective activity spawned by the sea breeze, but no heavy amounts in our area forecast for the next 7 days. On the next slide, we'll look ahead to the week 2 forecast, 8 to 14 days out. And this is now a probabilistic forecast, but it does show, kind of indicate lower pressure and troughing continuing over Texas, with the likelihood of below normal temperatures over on the left. But over on the right is the precipitation forecast, which hints at increased chances for above normal rainfall over the eastern United States. But again, this is 8 to 14 days out, not a lot of predictive skill, maybe just some indication that this stubborn high pressure is breaking down in the week 2 time period. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at the Pacific Ocean, and this is the current sea surface temperature anomalies across the Pacific. And we see along the equator that the cold anomalies that have been present all throughout the fall and winter have really broken down, and we are now no longer in the La Nina or cold water phase of the Pacific Ocean. We have returned to neutral conditions. The most recent outlook from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, we have dropped the La Nina advisory wording, and we are firmly in the neutral phase right now. On the bottom is the Nino 3.4 index, where we see over the past several weeks it has returned to near normal, certainly within that 0.5 degree Celsius threshold that designates La Nina from neutral conditions. So been in neutral conditions for the past several weeks, and that's very likely to continue during the summer, as we'll see on the next slide. Over on the left is the probabilistic forecast for ENSO phase over the next 12 months. And we see as we get into the second set of bars, to May, June, and July, that neutral conditions are very heavily favored, over 70%. La Nina conditions are only at the climatological norm, but probably that's even overdone as we return to neutral conditions. Very likely we'll continue in neutral throughout the summer. As we get into the fall, the October, November, December timeframe, they are showing increased chances of La Nina re-intensifying or redeveloping, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. So that's more a wait and see if we're going to go into another year of La Nina. But right now, there's not a lot of indications that that will happen. Over on the right is the forecast model plume, where you see a pretty large spread between all the different models, but the ensemble average is right around 0. So with this is a lot of support for the forecast for neutral conditions to continue throughout the summer and into the fall. And with that in mind, we'll start looking at the seasonal outlook from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. Over on the left is the temperature outlook, based mostly on recent trends over the last decade or more, pretty strongly weighted towards above normal temperatures, which we've seen consistently over the last couple decades. Over on the right is the precipitation forecast, which does indicate an increased chance of above normal rainfall through the June, July, August timeframe, or meteorological summer. But we'll have to take that with a grain of salt, that during the summertime, especially, there's not a lot of predictive skill in these 3-month outlooks. So this is better than being an unfavorable forecast, but there's still a lot of uncertainty and not a lot of skill there. So on the next slide, we'll wrap up with the seasonal drought outlook from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. And the only areas of concern are where there's moderate drought along the coastal Carolinas. And as we go into the summer season where rainfall is very spotty, that area drought is actually forecast to persist. Where the spots of drought and abnormally dry conditions over South Florida, removal is likely, as while we're a little bit late, we are about to enter the summer rainy season, which should ameliorate drought concerns. So with that, we'll one more slide. Let's talk about the seasonal hurricane forecast that NOAA released last week without much fanfare. But again, we are forecast for a above average active season in the Atlantic Basin. Here we see the pie chart with the 60% chance of above normal activity, 30% chance of near normal, and only a 10% chance of below normal activity in the Atlantic Basin. And on the right, you see the number of named storms forecast between 13 and 20, between 6 and 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 5 major hurricanes. And as we said last time, there's been a little bit of change. The official hurricane season start date is still June 1st, but because the last 7 years in a row now, including this year with Tropical Storm Anna out by Bermuda that lasted a couple days, we've had 7 years in a row of named storms prior to June 1st. So NOAA's the National Hurricane Center began issuing daily advisories on May 15th. And over on the left just shows climatologically where these early season storms are most likely to form, especially the first third of the month of June. And the preferred regions are by far the Gulf of Mexico and the Northwest Caribbean, which is something we need to pay attention to, as these storms are much more likely to impact our area than storms that form out over the Atlantic. So on the next slide, we'll go ahead and summarize. In the past couple of weeks, we've seen very heavy rainfall over Louisiana and Texas, but also that came with blocking high pressure and little or no rainfall over the ACF Basin and the peninsula of Florida. We've seen 2 or 3 weeks without rainfall, and it is drying conditions in the ACF. Actually, this drying window has been a favorable thing for row crop farmers, as they've been running 2 to 3 weeks behind in planting of peanuts and cotton due to all the rainfall we had in April and early May. So this has been a very welcome dry window to get their crops in and established. We are also seeing rapidly increasing wildfire danger over Central and South Florida. At longer time frames, we've seen near normal rainfall over the past 30 and 90 days. High pressure is keeping the 7-day forecast mostly dry, but it looks to be breaking down in week 2. The La Nina advisory has been canceled. We are firmly in neutral conditions, and that should persist through the summer. We'll see what fall brings if there is a return to La Nina conditions. The CPC seasonal forecast favors above normal temperatures, but slightly leans towards above normal rainfall also during the summer season. The NOAA hurricane forecast calls for a 60% chance of an above normal year, but keep in mind this is a less active forecast than was made last year, and certainly what turned out to be a record-setting year in the Atlantic Basin. The rainy season is already late for South and Central Florida, and quickly intensifying drought is possible before it sets in. Coastal Carolinas is also another area in moderate drought that needs to be watched.
Thank you, David. And I've had a couple comments come in that I'll share with the group relevant to this update. David gave to us. As of noon today, there are now 71 active wildfires in Florida. And James Hawthorne of the Mobile District of Army Corps Engineers commented that they witnessed similar stubborn high pressure systems over the Southeast during the 2007 drought. So some food for thought there. Now I'll turn it over to Tom Littlepage with the state of Alabama input when you're ready, Tom.
Thank you, Rachel. Basically, just to echo what David showed us, we are clear in this map. Go ahead. And in the current draft, I should say, with regards to the development of the map that will be released on Thursday. So we certainly, and this is a reflection of, we updated the Alabama Drought Declaration at our monitoring and impact group meeting that was held in mid-May, and cleared out what was a little bit that was in the Tallapoosa Basin, so that we now have a statewide clear declaration in place. Next slide. So while we're cautiously optimistic about current conditions, we know that given the season and the time of the year that we're in and the increasing temperatures, as David alluded to, sporadic rainfall and increasing water demand by vegetation, we certainly could find ourselves in trouble pretty quickly. So we do maintain updated information on our website. I point that to you, and maybe in a future meeting, I'll walk through some of the gauge analysis that we provide that's updated weekly. Okay, next slide. So just quick and dirty, we've improved conditions, but given where we are, we know that this could be a temporary improvement. At this point, we have no reported water availability issues that have been reported to the Office of Water Resources, but we are continuing to monitor conditions, including we scheduled the next meeting of our Drought Monitoring and Impact Group. Next slide. For July the 15th, I'm sorry, for June the 15th. We're going to continue to hold these as virtual meetings. I guess we can have some discussion about beginning to open up for in-person attendance, but this meeting is also scheduled as a virtual meeting. So quick and dirty, be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Now I'll pass it to Paul Inkhorn with our Streamflow and groundwater conditions when you're ready.
All right, yeah, next slide, please, Rachel. So good afternoon, everyone. We'll begin by looking at real-time Streamflow conditions across the Southeast. And so compared to the previous webinar, we're looking at least in the southern part of Alabama and Georgia, conditions have returned pretty much from the high flow that we were seeing in late April back down into the normal range, and then extending further upwards through the state. Majority of Georgia and Alabama showing normal conditions at this time. We'll highlight eastern North Carolina there. We're starting to see some declining flows, which are lower than normal for sure, and that just highlights what David showed previously. We're seeing some drying out in that portion of the state. As you move west, conditions in North Carolina are moving or remaining in the normal conditions. And then just to reiterate, across the ACF basin, we're seeing predominantly normal conditions, some low and below normal, likely a result of lake or release patterns. But as a whole, the ACF basin is currently flowing at normal conditions. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at, this is the percentage of stream gauges within each flow percentile for the previous 45 days. And so you can see right around April 24th, 25th there, we were starting to show below normal conditions. They were increasing across Georgia, and then we had that fairly large rainfall event, and then basically the axis flipped, and then the majority of our streams were flowing above normal. And then, of course, beginning of May, we had a few events that returned back into much above normal. But for the past 14 days or so, the state of Georgia, conditions have ranked at the majority of sites in the normal range. So as of today, we have 78% of stream gauges currently ranking normal. So for the time being, we have ample water at least flowing in the streams. So we'll take a look at the next slide and we'll begin. This is the below normal 7-day average stream flow. So this is an indication of hydrologic drought, and we are currently the southeast. All streams are flowing well above that 7-day average low, so we're not seeing any indication of hydrologic drought, and within the ACF basin, of course. All right, next slide, please, Rachel. So now we'll begin looking at 28-day average stream flows. That's shown by the solid bold line, and then they are ranked with historical daily averages. So this gives you an indication of trends within the past 28 days. So Chattahoochee River, Cornelia, we went from much above normal, which is what we saw during our last webinar. Flows have declined. They're pretty much following the trend that we generally see this time of year, which is a slight decline of 28-day average flow. And so we're seeing conditions currently at normal. And then Chattahoochee River at Dahlonega, the 28-day average flow is right at the 75th percentile on the border between normal and above normal. So flows into Lanier currently are looking good. Now we'll move downstream of Lanier. So Chattahoochee River at Atlanta, currently at the above normal range. And Whitesburg has just crossed the 90th percentile, and that's showing much above normal for this time of year. So next slide, we'll move further downstream. So West Point, again, right around 90th percentile, and Chattahoochee at Columbus, 28-day average is ranking above normal. All right, next slide, we'll move over to the Flint River. So we start upstream. Our most upstream site, Flint River at Griffin, is right around the 50th percentile. And then moving downstream to Carsonville, we're looking at normal conditions there for the 28-day average flow. Next slide is further as we move downstream, further downstream. Flint River at Albany and Bainbridge are both currently well within the normal range. All right. Our last station is Apalachicola River at Chattahoochee, and currently we've seen a leveling off of the flow there, the 28-day averaged flow for the past month or so, and that's currently just moved into above normal. All right, so stream flow for the time being, like I mentioned, we have what seems to be ample flow. We're hopeful for more rain for sure. So we'll look now at stream flow or groundwater conditions, excuse me. So on the right here, we're looking at the real-time network, and then for the ACF basin, we're seeing what we typically see. Majority of our wells are currently in the normal range, but they're bracketed either side with below normal and above normal. And you see our two circled indicator sites there. Those are the two that we look at each month. So the next slide, we'll look at our first one, Miller County. So the left is the real-time elevation for that well, and you can see the current conditions are ranked well above the golden triangles there, which is the long-term median elevation. And then so on the right, you see that data plotted with historical data, and you see a slight decline from our last webinar. We moved through the above normal, and currently elevation at that well is right in the normal range. Next slide is Doherty County. So my apologies here, the image on the left, the graph there, that is from the previous webinar. I must have probably embedded the upgraded one underneath. So, but anyway, you can see on the right what's happening there. at least in the trend wise. This well, we see a little more fluctuation. So it's bounced around between above normal and normal, but the current elevation is ranking at above normal. So that concludes the well data. So we'll just summarize here. Real-time stream flow for the ACF Basin is currently in the high to low range. The below normal 7-day average stream flow indicates the basin to be hydrologically drought-free. 28-day average stream flow for the Chattahoochee currently ranges from normal to normal range. I believe that's supposed to be above normal. 28-day average stream flow for the Flint River currently in the above normal to normal range, and then groundwater levels across the basin and at our two reference sites currently rank from normal to above normal respectively. And that concludes it. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Paul. Now I'll turn it over to Jody Juan with the ACF reservoir conditions. When you're ready, Jody.
Hi, Rachel. Yeah, next slide would be perfect. So currently at Hoover Dam and Lake Lanier, we're looking to stay in zone 1. The inflows have dropped a little bit within this past 2 weeks, but we're still in zone 1. Looks like flows hopefully will continue to stay around 1,000 CFS, and we'll continue to stay in zone 1. Next slide, please, Rachel. For West Point, still in zone 1, we have been pushing a bit of water down towards Woodruff to make our discharge requirements. So we've been pulling water from both these two projects here. But so far they're still in zone 1. We're hoping that we get a little rain within the next couple of weeks just to help us get to the top of our conservation levels. Next slide, please, Rachel. So at Walter F. George, which is our the project that is right above Woodruff that we usually use to help us meet our discharge demands. It's dipped down into zone 2 a little bit because we were pulling a little bit more and we're trying to ramp down. However, it's since recovered and it's in zone 1 due to us pulling water from Buford and from West Point. In the next couple of weeks, we're looking to see it just hit below top of conservation. If we do get a little rain, this will be our first project that will fill up, and it's the easiest for us to fill. Next one, and Jim Woodruff. Jim Woodruff has been definitely ramping down a little bit. We're trying to keep it at between 76.7 and 77 even, just help with the ramp down rates and such. And so far we're looking to be around that area. Next one. So far with all of our, even with the inflows dropping a little bit and the ACF drying up just a tad, it looks like we're still going to be in zone 1 and towards the top of our conservation within the next 5 weeks. So overall, inflows into the project are below normal due to the few rain events that we've had. The one that we've had, I think 3 weeks ago, was the last one before we had this little dry spell. Currently, all the projects are operating slightly below guide curve, but still within zone 1. Walter F. George and West Point just finished their refills on June 1st. We are slightly below, but hopefully with the rain and all the slightly above average hurricanes that we'll be getting this upcoming hurricane season, that'll help us a little bit. As I said before, Walter F. George did briefly enter zone 2, but it was recovered with the anticipated discharges from upper basins, mainly Buford and West Point, and then the ACF system conservation storage is in zone 1 and is forecasted to remain in zone 1 for the next month.
Thank you, Jody. And now I'll present on behalf of Samantha Lucas, who could not be here with us today, from the Apalachicola Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. an update on salinity data for 3 water quality stations that are positioned within the Bay system. They have a total of 6 water quality stations that are part of SWAMP, or the system-wide monitoring program. These are marked by the yellow icons on this map. All of the NERs in the nation participate in this program, and data is collected 365 days a year in 15-minute intervals. They typically go out every few weeks to exchange instruments to help allow for continuous data to be collected. The 3 stations that we'll be focusing on are, first of all, East Bay Station, which is north of the weather station on this map. It functions as an important nursery in the Apalachicola Bay system. If you travel south of East Bay, you'll see Cat Point that is located on a historic commercial oyster bar. And lastly, the station across the bay to the west called Dry Bar, which is also located on a historic commercial oyster bar. Now we'll dive into each of these 3 stations. We'll start with Cat Point. And as a reminder, this might be the first time you're seeing some of these graphs. They are created from daily averages from 1992 until 2021, and the black line denotes the 2021 daily average. Values at Cat Point decreased in April, and much of that data falls within the 10th to 25th percentile range for the month. And the typical response for this time of year is to see values increasing during the dry season. Moving on to Dry Bar, values remained relatively constant in April with some spikes observed at the end of the month. And the river water for this particular station runs west in the system, and due to Dry Bar's position, it's impacted by this flow and as well as tidal influences from the passes. Lastly, we'll look at East Bay Bottom. The salinity at this station is typically lower due to its proximity to the river, and high spikes are going to correspond to lower flow events. So variability in river flow greatly impacts this station in particular. There was a gradual decrease in values continued through the end of April. Brief summary for you all. Over the past few years, they've observed lower salinity values overall in response to increased freshwater input into the system relative to their previous long-term data sets. Just to recap, Cat Point salinity values decreased in April, and those values largely fell within the 10th to 25th percentile for the month. Dry Bar salinity values remained relatively constant with spikes at the end of the month, and East Bay Bottom, which is typically lower in salinity values, saw a gradual decrease in values throughout the end of the month. And now we'll have our last speaker, Todd Hamill, give us the Streamflow forecast for the ACF. When you're ready, Todd.
Thank you. So to start off with, we're going to look at some potential inflows over the next 10 days. And this is based on the GFS model. And we'll start off with Lake Lanier and inflows potential into Lake Lanier. And the most likely range is this orange range. So really the inflows are reasonably low. But this isn't unexpected for this time of year. As we go through the transition from kind of the winter spring rainfall into convective summer rainfall, and then also as was mentioned by David, the omega high that's kind of sitting with hot weather, it does look like we're not going to get as high of inflows just because we're having where evapotranspiration is taking a little bit of that water and so forth. So these are the next 10 days, and this isn't unusual though as we go into the summer. We expect stream flows to start to come down at this time of year. So let's go ahead and go to the next one, which is looking downstream of there, and that's the Chattahoochee. That's below Lake Lanier, and we don't see a whole lot of change in there. And part of those changes in there is that we don't have much variation in what they're releasing from Lake Lanier, and we don't see a whole lot of rainfall below there. So and that's just, again, model output going into our river models to be able to look at this stuff. So we see very little variation in that and not a whole lot of water. So let's go ahead and move on down the river here. Oh, we're going to Flint River. We're going to Flint River, and these are uncontrolled, so there's nothing above them. And again, we're seeing much of the same thing over the next 10 days. Stream flows are not going to change a whole lot. They should be fairly steady because we're not expecting a whole lot of rainfall. And we'll go ahead and go on down the Flint now. And here's the Flint River near Albany. And as we get further down, the actual stream flows compared to what our minor, moderate, and major is obviously much lower. So we're looking at, again, we don't see as much variation in that also. So we still see low flows in that area. Again, not too far below normal, but again, not all that high and certainly not flooding for this time of year. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is our as they come together, the Apalachicola River below Woodruff Dam. And we're starting to see those flows coming down as they start to have less water coming into the reservoir and start having lower releases as we go forward. And so now we'll look at a little climatology. And so the climatology, actually, I thought there was an arrow in here, but we're actually in about week 21 or so. So we're coming out of our peak flooding period and going into our more summer convective time. And so this is this is kind of what we would expect for this time of year as stream flows start to come down, because even with normal rainfall, evapotranspiration is higher, and we tend to, so we kind of, our stream flows averages tend to go down. And this is shown in here. However, as you can see, we can have flooding at any time of year. So if this pattern changes quickly, it could also change quickly, but we have the benefit now of having a little bit drier soils, so it takes more to get flooding in the southeast if that happens. But the potential for flooding, we have the potential for flooding at any time this year. Okay, so go ahead and let's go to the next one. And so here's our 1 month stream flow forecast. And because we've started up a little bit higher on our stream flows, even though we've been dry, our last 90 days have kept us pretty normal. And you saw that from the stream flows. And with the future forecast looking at possibly above normal, maybe near normal stream or rainfall, I think we're looking at stream flow forecasts that are near normal for throughout the whole basin from top to bottom. And again, it's the multitude of factors. We've come off a wet winter and spring, even though we're drying out right now. And so it looks like we'll be normal for the June timeframe. And then when we look at the 3 month, we're going to look at something which is the next slide, and that's very much the same thing. Is that we'll be looking at our best chance for is probably getting a slightly drier. You can see just a little bit from where we were. This is so different than what we've been seeing the last 9 months or so, where everything's been pretty wet. We are seeing mostly near normal, but we're having that area of dry get a little bit bigger right now. So we have like equal chances of the above normal or below normal right now. But right now, again, like I said, for the monthly, it looks like we're going to have normal stream flows for this time of year. Part of that is because we do have plenty of water in the reservoirs. We have plenty of water at the top at Lake Lanier, and that helps a whole lot also. So, so again, we're looking at normal stream flows throughout the summer, even though those stream flows, the normal stream flows will be decreasing some, but they still should say normal for that time of year. So let's go to our final slide, I believe. And so right now, no flooding and really decreasing flows expected in the next 10 days. We're looking at near normal for both the 1 month and the 3 month. But again, as I mentioned before, we get a pattern change or we get something to develop, that could change very quickly. So, and that's all I have for today.
Thanks, Todd. The last thing we have before we're going to open up for questions and comments is we would like to mention we have, as part of our much anticipated ACF Drought Dashboard project that we've been working with NIDIS, also Albany State University, the ACF stakeholders, and the Auburn University Water Resources Center, we have upcoming interactive review workshops. So these are some follow-up workshops from March, April, and May of 2020 listening sessions. where we'll have some time for attendees to interact with the draft version of this dashboard among some other components. That right now we don't have registration open. It will be open shortly, and I will be sending that information to this email list. But go ahead and mark your calendars for these 3 dates, July 9th, July 16th, and July 23rd. These will all be virtual, and those webinars will take place from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. noon Eastern. For any questions or for additional information, you can contact Kristen Rouse. Her email is on the bottom of your screen right now, and I believe she is one of our webinar attendees today. I will include this information in our follow-up email as well if you're unable to write any of this down currently. Now I'd like to open up the floor for any questions or comments. You can raise your hand, or you can use the question box, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I have a question from Molly Samuel. Is the number of wildfires in Florida unusual at this point in time? That may be a question for you, David, or someone in your office.
Yeah, this is David Zierden. You know, I don't know if the number we're seeing right now is unusual. With this recent dry spell, we certainly have entered into a period with increased wildfire risk, but luckily we didn't have a lot of drought during the winter, so dry fuels haven't really accumulated as bad as they could in some years. But this is always the critical time of the year that when temperature and evapotranspiration has really increased with the onset of summer. But if the summer rainy season has not begun yet, that's when we can really get into a serious situation with wildfires. So I'm sure it's something they're watching carefully and on guard about, and then we'll have to monitor it closely the next couple weeks.
Thanks, David. There's another question from James Hawthorne. Does anyone believe we are entering early drought conditions or just an anomaly of dry early summer? I'd open that up to any of our speakers today to answer.
This is Todd, and you know, right now it seems like we're, in my opinion, we're kind of at a tipping point. We've been dry, and so we could creep into drought pretty quickly if we don't start over the next 2 weeks. If we really don't start to see rainfall, I think our rivers will stay reasonable, but I think you'll start to see creeks and things around it, and a lot of things that I think that those will be the first things to really start to be affected. But if we get past this, you know, if we start to get rain, and it does look like maybe this is breaking down just a little bit the high, and that we're starting to see rain creep further into the southeast, then, you know, we could go either way, but it is kind of a tipping point. I think we could go into drought pretty quickly if we don't start seeing rain soon. And that, like I said, that's just from my point of view, but someone may have another.
Well, I'll take the silence as agreement with you, Todd.
Yeah.
There's still a little bit of time left. If you have any questions or comments, you can ask now. And while I give another minute, I just want to take some time to thank our speakers, David Zierden, Tom Littlepage, Paul Ancorn, Jody Juan, Todd Hamill, and content from Samantha Lucas. And I don't see any other questions coming in. So I'll remind everybody that the next webinar will be Tuesday, June 22nd, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. And we had to postpone our guest speaker, Mike Hobbins, who will talk to us about the evaporative demand drought index to next month. So that will be a very interesting presentation, I'm sure, and certainly very pertinent to the ACF and the Southeast as a whole. My contact information is on the bottom left. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. There will also be a video recording of this webinar posted online on YouTube, and you'll receive a summary email in 24 to 48 hours with today's briefing. Thank you for being here.